And it is time to bring in our State House insiders. Joel Sawyer, our Republican strategist, Antoine C. Wright, our Democrat strategist. Guys, thank you for your time tonight. Let's talk about last night's very first Republican presidential debate. Of course, two big South Carolina politicians on the debate stage, former Governor Nikki Haley and Senator Tim Scott. Joel, what was your take of the evening?
I don't think that anybody had, look, the biggest thing you want to go into a debate hoping is that you don't mess up, that you don't lose votes. And I don't really think that happened for anybody last night. I was looking at some very interesting tracking polls a little bit earlier done by the 538 blog where they asked people, the same group of people before and after the debate, if they would consider voting for those candidates on stage. And Nikki Haley actually had the biggest swing of consideration score, if you want to call it that. So, look, by the numbers, I thought that she had a very good night. I thought that she set herself apart, certainly by being the only woman on stage. But I thought Tim Scott had a solid performance as well.
Well, I disagree with Joel, obviously, and I disagree because at the end of the day, no matter who said what, although all of the folks on that stage were extremes as extreme can get. In fact, I think it was a full sprint towards extremism if I had to define that debate. But nevertheless, it doesn't matter what happened at the debate because most of the people who watched the debate last night, their minds were made up. And for the ones who may be on the fence or looking for an alternative or an option, I don't think last night settled the case. What I do think the former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, was able to do was to turn down her extremism and sound somewhat normal on that debate stage. And so I think to some, that gave her some sort of victory lap to take this morning and the days to come. However, what we know about debates are they're only for a moment. They do not normally provide a movement, especially in the Republican Party that has been hijacked by the MAGA extremists. And when Donald Trump turns himself in and when all that sucks up the news cycle, what I can guarantee you is no one will be thinking about last night's debate. So it's back to normal. Trump dominating the news cycle per the usual.
The former governor did appear on CBS this morning earlier today, and she talked about her mindset going into last night's debate. Take a listen.
The strategy was just to be honest with the American people and try and show them a vision forward. I don't think our country's ever been more divided than it is right now. And we have to really start focusing on what we're going to do. And this isn't just about the economy, schools, border for 4 years. This is really about us having a vision for the next 10 and 20 years. And Americans are tired of all of the distractions and all of the noise. And I think they want to start seeing government work for them again.
So, Antoine, last night, the former governor on stage talking about adding money to the deficit, saying that Republicans have done more in the past few years than the Democrats in adding money to that deficit. Your take?
Look, it was a great ad for President Biden and the Democrats, and I'm sure ad makers on the Democratic side everywhere were going ahead and putting together the content. In fact, the president actually tweeted from his political account, she's right, or something to that degree, because at the end of the day, Washington, D.C. Republicans have been declaring out loud they had nothing to do with the debt and deficit when we know what the Trump tax scam was able to do, and most of them voted for it. So I think it was smart for the former governor to try to separate herself from D.C. politicians and differentiate herself. But the fact is, there's no way you can be the Republican nominee without embracing Trumpism, even if you try to run away from Trump. So at some point, she's going to have to lean in and embrace Trumpism if she wants a shot at being the Republican nominee.
On the Democrat side of the ticket, Democrat presidential hopeful Robert F. Kennedy Jr. visited our News 19 studios earlier this week. As you guys know, he's been holding meet and greets across the state of South Carolina this week. He says a lot of people are showing up talking about the high cost of food, the high cost of gas, and home mortgage rates. One of the things he told me during our interview is that he wants to lower mortgage rates if elected. Take a listen.
I'm going to create 3% mortgages guaranteed for Americans, and I'm going to do that without raising the federal deficit by a penny. And here's how. If you had a rich uncle who would co-sign your mortgage for you, and he's very rich, you can get a much lower rate on your mortgage than the average person. So I'm going to bring in Uncle Sam to be everybody's rich uncle.
Joel, let me get your reaction to that. RFK Jr. saying mortgage rates should drop to 3%. That's a lot lower than 7-8% than what a lot of people are paying now.
I mean, look, when you're running as an outsider candidate and you have, very little shot, if anything, of winning, I mean, you can make all kinds of fantastical promises. I would say if you look, I would say if you look historically, the more government has got into the business of price controls and subsidization of things, the more prices have skyrocketed out of control. You look at how much government has tried to subsidize the home ownership market and what that's done to mortgage rate and home costs. You look at what the government has done in terms of subsidizing higher ed, and you look at what that's done to higher ed costs. And so, I think more government intervention in markets is typically a recipe for higher and not lower costs.
Look, I think President Biden is the declared so far Democratic nominee for president. I don't see that changing, no matter what any of these other people who decide to insert themselves into the political process. And as we talked about last week on this program, it's not unusual for these things to happen, but it's also not unusual for them to be shut down very quickly. So at the end of the day, Democrats will rally behind Joe Biden and Kamala Harris because we have a record and a body of work to be proud of. And I will take Joe Biden and Kamala Harris any day of the week compared to RFK, Marianne Williamson, or anybody on the debate stage last night, or even those who were not, including the former president of the United States.
All right, Antoine C. Wright and Joel Sawyer. Guys, thank you so very much for your time. For the very latest on what's going on in the race for the White House, as well as a look back at last night's debate, simply go to our website. That's WLTX.com. A short break. We'll be back.